Welcome to Wisdom Trek with Gramps. I am Guthrie Chamberlain, and we are on day 2553 of our trek. The purpose of Wisdom Trek is to create a legacy of wisdom, to seek out discernment and insights, and to boldly grow where few have chosen to grow before. In today's Wisdom Nugget, we'll dive into Psalm 44, verses 1 through 8 from the New Living Translation. These verses reflect on God's mighty deeds in the past, His faithfulness to His people, and a call to trust Him in the present. Psalm 44 is attributed to the sons of Korah, a group of temple musicians known for their heartfelt and poetic psalms. In the first 8 verses, the psalmist recalls God's great work in history and expresses confidence that His power and guidance remain active. It's a reminder that while we honor what God has done, our faith must be alive in the present. Let's begin by reading the passage together. Psalm 44, verses 1 through 8. O God, we have heard it with our own ears. Our ancestors have told us of all you did in their day, in days long ago. You drove out the pagan nations by your power and gave all the land to our ancestors. You crushed their enemies and set our ancestors free. They did not conquer the land with their swords. It was not their own strong arm that gave them victory. It was your right hand and strong arm, and the blinding light of your face that helped them, for you loved them. You are my King and my God. You command victories for Israel. Only by your power can we push back our enemies. Only in your name can we trample our foes. I do not trust in my bow. I do not count on my sword to save me. You are the one who gives us victory over our enemies. You disgrace those who hate us. O God, we give you glory all day long and constantly praise your name. The psalm begins with a reflection of God's past faithfulness. O God, we have heard it with our own ears. Our ancestors have told us all you did in their day, in the days long ago. This verse highlights the importance of remembering passing down stories of God's mighty works. The psalmist recalls how God delivered His people, drove out the nations, and gave the land of Israel as an inheritance. In verses 2 and 3, the psalmist emphasizes these victories were not achieved by human strength. They did not conquer the land with their swords. It was not their strong arm that gave them victory. It was your right hand and strong arm and the blinding light of your face that helped them, for you loved them. These verses acknowledge that Israel's success came solely from God's power and love. This historical perspective is significant because it reminds us that the same God who worked in the past is still at work today. The psalmist's words challenge us that our victories, too, are a result of God's hand, not merely our efforts. I once heard a story about a family who, at every Thanksgiving, took time to recount how God had provided for them over the years. From the story of financial provisions to answered prayers during health crisis, these testimonies reminded them of God's faithfulness. Similarly, the psalmist recalls God's past deeds as a way of strengthening his faith for the present. Take time to reflect and share stories of God's faithfulness in your life or the lives of those who came before you. These reminders not only will build gratitude, but also encourage faith in His continued provisions. In verse 4, the psalmist shifts to a personal declaration. You are my King and my God. You command victories for Israel. This verse transitions from a communal memory of God's work to a personal acknowledgement of His sovereignty. The psalmist doesn't merely recount what God has done for others. He claims God is his own King and expresses trust in His continued guidance. Verse 5 follows with a bold statement of reliance on God's power. Only by your power can we push back our enemies. Only in your name can we trample our foes. The psalmist recognizes that victory comes not from human strength, but from God's authority and intervention. Think about a sports team that attributes their success to their coach. While the players execute the game plan, they know it's the coach's strategy and leadership that gives them victory. Similarly, the psalmist acknowledges that while human efforts play a role, ultimate success depends on God's direction and power. In our own lives, consider the areas where you are relying on your own strength instead of seeking God's guidance. These verses remind us to look to Him as our King, trusting His wisdom and power to lead us to victory. In verses 6 and 7, the psalmist explicitly rejects reliance on human strength. I do not trust in my bow. I do not count on my sword to save me. You are the one who will give us victory over our enemies. You disgrace those who hate us. These verses are a powerful reminder that while tools and strategies are important, they are not the source of true victory. The psalmist's words reflect a profound dependence on God by stating, I do not trust in my bow. He acknowledges that even the best human resources are inadequate without God's intervention. This humility is essential for a life of faith. It keeps us grounded and reminds us that we are ultimately dependent on God's power. I'm reminded of a farmer who plants seeds, waters the soils, and works hard to care for his crops. Yet he knows that the growth of those plants ultimately depends on factors outside of his control, like sunlight and rain. In the same way, we can do our part, but we must trust God to bring the results. Are there areas of your life where you are overly reliant on your own abilities or resources? These verses challenge us to place our trust in God, recognizing that He is the source of every success. The psalmist concludes this section with a beautiful response of praise. "O God, we give glory to you all day long and constantly praise your name." This verse captures the heart of the psalm. A recognition of all glory belongs to God. The psalmist doesn't take credit for his past victories or the future successes. Instead, he directs all praise to the one who makes everything possible. What stands out here is the consistency of the psalmist's praise, all day long and constantly. This isn't a fleeting moment of gratitude, it's a lifestyle of worship. By keeping God at the center, the psalmist ensures that his faith remains strong regardless of the circumstances. I once heard of a businessman who, after a major career breakthrough, took no credit for his success. Instead, he publicly thanked God, acknowledging that everything he had achieved was the result of God's grace. His consistent gratitude inspired those around him to reflect on their own blessings and to give thanks. How can we cultivate a lifestyle of consistent praise? Consider setting aside a moment throughout the day to thank God for His faithfulness. Whether in prayer, song, or quiet reflection, make it a habit to give Him the glory that He deserves. In Psalm chapter 44, verses 1 through 8, it offers us timeless lessons on our faith journey. Let's recap some of the key themes. First, remembering God's faithfulness. Reflecting on what God has done in the past strengthens our faith in the present and the future. Second, trusting in God's sovereignty. Victory comes not from human effort, but from God's power and guidance. He is the King and the provider. Third, rejecting self-reliance. While our resources and abilities are important, they are not the ultimate source of our success. True victory comes from God. And fourth, living a life of praise. Consistent gratitude and worship keep our hearts aligned with God and reminds us of His constant presence and provision. How can we apply these truths of this passage to our daily lives? Well, here are a few suggestions. We need to share stories of God's faithfulness. Take time to recount how God has worked in your life and share their stories with others. They can inspire faith and gratitude. Also, we need to surrender our plans to God. Before taking on a new challenge, ask God for His guidance and trust Him to direct your steps. Next, we need to praise God daily. Make it a habit to thank God throughout the day, recognizing His hand in both big and small blessings. And then lean on God's strength. When faced with difficulties, remind yourself that God is the ultimate source of help and victory. As we reflect on Psalm chapter 44, verses 1 through 8, we're reminded of the importance of remembering God's past faithfulness, trusting in His power, and living a life of worship and gratitude. These verses challenge us not to rely on ourselves, but on the God who has been faithful through every generation. Thank you for joining me today on our Wisdom Trek. As you go about your week, I encourage you to trust in God's sovereignty, celebrate His faithfulness, and live with a heart of constant praise. Until the next time, may God's wisdom guide your steps, and may His peace fill your hearts. And if you found this podcast insightful, please subscribe and leave us a review. Then encourage your friends and family to join us and come along with us tomorrow for another day of Wisdom Trek, creating a legacy. Thank you so much for allowing me to be your guide, your mentor, and most importantly, I am your friend as I serve you through the Wisdom Trek podcast and journal. As we take this trek of life together, let us always live abundantly, love unconditionally, listen intentionally, learn continuously, lend to others generously, lead with integrity, and leave a living legacy each day. I am Guthrie Chamberlain, reminding you to keep moving forward, enjoy your journey, and create a great day every day. See you next time for more daily wisdom.